On today's episode of the Cryptoverse. So let's pretend that you are one of the 21 elected EOS block producers. So being an elected block producer, that gives you certain superpowers because in agreement with 2/3 of all the elected 21 block producers, you can use those superpowers to do certain things. For example, the legitimate uses for these superpowers are you can do things like you can retrieve stolen tokens. If someone was scammed in a hack or something and they didn't intend for their tokens to be transferred to someone else, that's when 2/3 of the block producers can agree to make changes to the EOS blockchain. Okay? And also, if say a smart contract goes rogue, well, same sort of thing, big bug, potential loss of funds, then you can isolate that smart contract with 2/3 of the 21 block producers. They can freeze that smart contract to prevent harm to the rest of the network. Pretty cool stuff. But the question is, what happens when a government decides to overreach and ask you as a block producer to do certain things? Maybe that government wants to make certain changes to the blockchain just that they prefer, right? What happens in those circumstances? How will block producers handle this situation? Does the very fact that you are an elected block producer and the fact that you have superpowers open it up to a massive possible attack vector? Good question. So those are the questions that I would like to explore on today's episode of the Cryptoverse, so stay right there. So thanks to everyone who voted in my Twitter poll yesterday. I ran a poll on Twitter to say how many of you would like the ocean as the background for today's video, and overwhelming majority of people voted yes. It was a little bit difficult to pull this off actually. I'm having to use the notes on my phone because there's nowhere to put my laptop out here on the beach, so you'll have to bear with me for that one. So I also continue to receive very positive feedback about shooting these videos outdoors, which is kind of it's forcing me to think of different environments, and it's challenging my imagination to come up with different ideas for different environments so it doesn't get stale. I mean, I'll probably have to cycle around the different environments that I've already used eventually, but for the time being, because we're into this new shooting outdoors thing and because it's summertime, it's pretty easy to do. I haven't burned up many items from the list yet. So this is also, I suppose, better or preferable to the green screen because it's never going to quite match up to the real environments. Even if I put a beach scene on the green screen, it's not going to be the same as the real world, is it? So sorry to you, those of you that are listening on the audio podcast, because you'll have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about and you won't be privy to the nice environments. There is a reasonable amount of bugs around here like there was in the woods the other day, but we'll just have to put it with it for the benefit of the quality of the video. So let's move on. If EOS had a tagline, it would probably have many taglines. I think the official tagline is something like decentralize everything, but you know, it's a community project, so we can decide what the tagline is for ourselves, right? One of the taglines that I would come up with is the governed blockchain, which is one I've heard moved around in the EOS community quite a bit. So let's think about the DAO from Ethereum, right? When the DAO was exploited, well, it gave birth to what I would say is one of the most important philosophical discussions ever to grace the blockchain space. And it's a discussion that continues to this day, in fact. So the discussion is the topic of whether the code is the law, right? If the code allows you to do something and you do it, is that the law? And then therefore it's perfectly legitimate. If your code allows me to run a program that moves your funds from you to me, is that okay, right? That's is the code is law argument. So the Ethereum Classic community, when the DAO hack happened and a lot of Ethereum was transferred from one user to another without their permission, the Ethereum Classic community said, yes, if the code allowed the movement of those funds, I hesitated to use the word theft there because is it theft or not is the debate. So the Ethereum Classic community said, yes, the code is law. If the code allows you to move those funds, the thief now owns that crypto. The Ethereum community, the ETH community on the other hand, said no, and they subsequently performed a hard fork on the Ethereum blockchain to move those funds back to their original owners. So in that case, that was a ruling that the code was not the law, right? So the code was executed and it worked perfectly. However, that wasn't the intention, keyword, come back to that later, that wasn't the intention, therefore we'll intervene and roll it back. Now in the world of EOS, well, code is not law. That's kind of one of the design principles. The code is not law because it doesn't allow mistakes in the code, because it's written by a human being, and inevitably there will be mistakes in the code. So the code cannot be law, right? In EOS, it's the developer's intention that is the law. That's why I said I'll come back to the word intention in just a mo, and here it is. Intention is the law in EOS, right? So if the code if the code runs as intended, fine, it doesn't matter, does it? Because it's the intention and the code that matched. If the code runs counter to the intention, just because of some input which wasn't foreseen, because there's an infinite number of inputs that could go into a smart contract, and you can't test an infinite number of inputs. So there's always going to be some edge case or some circumstance under which a smart contract receives a command that it executes that does something terrible, right? Which wasn't the intention of the design, okay? So to back that up, there is the EOS constitution, right? So we're talking about the developer's intention is the law, right? And to back that up, there is an EOS constitution, right, which applies to every EOS user. Every EOS user, every time you do a transaction, you are re-agreeing to the constitution in the current version. So there's the bugs. Bugs in my face, not bugs in the code. That's kind of a funny pun. Right, so the EOS constitution is something I will explain in its own video, because it's a real big topic in EOS, and it's one of the differentiating factors, I would say. So EOS, code is not law. That's where we're at. So when the code does something in EOS which doesn't match the developer's intention, well, there's a built-in feature that allows that to be corrected, right? The code runs counter to the intention, and there has to be a way to correct that somehow. And in EOS there is. So I had to move away there from all the bugs. So let's carry on from where we were. Where I'd got to is saying that in EOS the code is not law, and it's the intention that is kind of the overriding authority. So if the code runs counter to the intention, the block producers, the top 21 block producers, with a 2/3 majority can correct that flaw. But it has to be at least 2/3 of the electric block producers that agree to whatever the correction is. And most importantly, this can only happen if the requested correction comes as the result of an arbitration case, in which, you know, all the circumstances are considered by the arbitrators, and then they're scrutinized, all the evidence, make sure the users who are saying they're a victim of a hack, say, are the real users and the owners of the original funds, and all the evidence is considered by the arbitration forum and the arbitrators and appointed arbitrators, and then that arbitration ruling is passed to the block producers, who review it all again just to make sure the arbitrators didn't make a mistake, and then they execute the correction only in that specific circumstances. So the notion that, say, the Chinese government, which is a concern for a lot of people, could just pick up the phone, call one of the Chinese block producers and ask them to freeze the account of a citizen that is misbehaving in their eyes, it's not even possible, right? The block producer couldn't grant that request even if they wanted to, right? Even if they had a gun to their head and they were literally about to die if they didn't carry out the requests, they just couldn't physically do it. The code just physically does not allow a single block producer to grant that kind of a request. So even if they did fear for their life, right, even if they were willing to throw all of their ethics and morals completely out of the window, even if they were willing to throw the entire EOS community under the bus, they still couldn't physically do it. They just physically could not comply. So just to make that point even further, at the time of recording, there are actually 6 Chinese block producers in the top 21, which many people, including myself, thinks is too many to have in a single country. However, if the Chinese government compromised all 6 of them even, still doesn't work. Even if all 6 of them had guns to their head and all 6 of them agreed that they would carry out the illicit intention of the government, still not enough. They still need 15 out of the 21. So they would then have to extend into other countries and convince 15 or another, how many we would need, another 9 block producers in other countries to also collude with the Chinese government and do what they wanted to do. And to get all those block producers to agree to the same thing, you know, as what the Chinese government wants to do, highly unlikely, right? That's why we have a blockchain, and EOS in particular creates the consensus, okay? Now, inspiration for this video actually came from another Reddit post, which I'll put up on screen. And the question this person asked was, it was kind of a question to block producers. It was, what will you do when governments demand you to freeze accounts or seize funds? To which EOS New York, at time of recording, block producer rank number 12, replied by saying, quote, "We will refuse to comply, and if necessary, we will resign. We've set up our corporate structure in a way that protects ourselves and the assets of the EOS New York as much as possible. We are saving block rewards right now so that we can build up a reserve. We have a very good law firm that we are working to put on a retainer. A single block producer cannot do anything. Even if a block producer wanted to comply, they simply could not. Governments would need to coordinate an attack on all 21 top block producers, and then standbys would step in." Close quote. So this Reddit discussion actually goes on, and there goes backwards and forwards, where someone points out that they say the top block producers have already demonstrated their ability to seize, or freeze rather, accounts when recently 7 accounts were frozen to prevent an attacker from stealing the money. And a whole bunch of people seem to have a problem with the EOS block producers preventing a robbery. It's almost like everyone wants the robbery to go ahead. I can't even get my head around that. So someone also says in this Reddit post that the US government has already had a good track record in terms of coordinating with law enforcement agencies around the world to do these coordinated law enforcement raids, or whatever you want to call them. If the US government wants to coordinate a raid and exert their will on different countries, they've been successful. Think Kim.com. You can look up that case on your own. So the suggestion is that the sting operation could be put together by multiple law enforcement agencies around the world, in which all 21 block producers would be targeted and raided simultaneously, right? So in that case, these law enforcement agencies wouldn't necessarily have to shut down these block producers, right? They would more likely just raid their offices and take control of the servers and do it quietly, right? Because then they could quietly use 2/3 of the block producer majority to make whatever changes they wanted to the blockchain, right? And tweak EOS in the way that the governments wanted to. Even then though, if you compromise all 21 top block producers and say they were in 5 or 6 different countries, you have to get all 5 or 6 of those governments to agree to collude to do whatever it was they wanted to do to the blockchain, which is almost a form of consensus as well, isn't it? Oh my goodness, it would be very complicated. So, as far-fetched as this wild example is, it's plausible, all right, which is why I'm talking about it. So, if I just said it's never going to happen, that wouldn't be good enough for a lot of people. So that's why I'm going into it. But I have a couple of things to say about this wild scenario. The first one is this. The block producers could come up with a dead man switch scenario, right? So this could be as simple as a little key fob that each of the major, block producer employees have in their pocket, which you could press, and all it would do at the press of a button, it would send out a cryptographically signed EOS transaction to signal that that block producer had been compromised, right? You can look up Dead Man Switch. I'll put up a link in the video description for this video. It's an established mechanism you can use it for all kinds of things, right? I think it was primarily used for stopping machines if someone died at the wheel of a forklift truck or something, but it can be used in all manner of different security scenarios. So in this case, they could also embed that Dead Man Switch broadcast transaction in multiple blockchains, just in case EOS was compromised, right? Maybe broadcasting an EOS transaction is not enough. Maybe you could embed it in the Steam blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, just so that there was no bloody way that that broadcast could be stopped. You would make sure that the Dead Man Switch was thrown and everyone knew about it. So let's use EOS New York as the example. If the offices of EOS New York were raided suddenly, one of the team, at the moment the FBI bursts in, could just reach into their pocket, casually press the Dead Man Switch and broadcast that transaction, right? So no one could stop that from happening, and then they could just comply, because the cat would then be out of the bag, right? If there were simultaneous raids on all the block producers, right, like this, well, they could all throw the Dead Man Switch, couldn't they, right? And what's interesting is, what's really funny about this, is that if they were all hit simultaneously, well, each block producer would think they were the only one being raided, and all would independently just press the Dead Man Switch to let everyone else know, without awareness that everyone else was being raided at the same time, right? But we, the community, would know, because we would see all 21 Dead Man Switches go at the same time. Now, I feel the need to point out at this point that we're in the wildest extremes of scenarios here, right? So we're imagining this possible attack scenario. And again, the reason I'm doing this is because saying it'll never happen is not an argument, right? It just won't satisfy some people's anxieties. What I think will give people confidence, though, is that I, Chris Coney on the internet, came up with the dead man switch scenario using a key fob, like within a few minutes of reading this Reddit post. So if I can come up with that in a few minutes, these world-class computer scientists and developers that work for all these block producers can definitely come up with a more robust security scenario than that. So that should give you a hell of a lot of confidence, right? And in that scenario, by the way, where say a dead man switch were thrown, well, the community could just exercise their voting power to change the block producer votes and switch out those top 21 block producers who had flagged themselves as being compromised via a dead man switch. They could have switched them out with 21 backup block producers within 3 minutes, and the EOS blockchain doesn't even blip. So that was my first point about this extreme scenario. Here's my second point. If the governments of the world were to do a coordinated raid to take control of these top 21 block producers, why on earth would they attack the EOS blockchain? Why would they choose EOS? Right, Bitcoin is much more powerful as a network, and they could potentially use this raid strategy on Bitcoin, right? So wouldn't they rather choose to target Bitcoin to take control of rather than EOS? So a coordinated raid on the top mining pools, or even the biggest mining facilities, would leave the governments in control of the network by hash power, because they could then decide with their massive amount of control over the hashing power what transactions to include, exclude. They could fork the chain, they could do whatever they wanted to do with it. If they just simply raided a whole bunch of, say, the top 21 biggest mining facilities in the world, or the top 21 mining pools, right? And just change the software. The difference is, if governments took control suddenly of all the major mining operations, it's not like EOS where it's a 3-minute job to replace all of the top block producers and the top miners. Bitcoin relies on physical possession of hundreds of millions of dollars of mining hardware, which you just simply cannot replace at the click of a button. So that's my argument for today. That's my sort of response to what the block producers would do if governments came to them and asked them to seize funds or freeze funds or do any kind of shenanigans like that. So that's all I got for you today. If you liked this episode, go ahead, hit the like button. If you disliked it, hit the dislike button. Please leave me a comment below with some feedback and get subscribed. And also, if you think I don't know what I'm talking about and you would like to take my step-by-step online courses, that'll help fund this channel. And it'll also teach you things like, if you want to know about the technical aspects of how a blockchain works, you can check out the Digital Money Revolution course. If you want to learn how to make and save money with Bitcoin, check out the Bitcoin Triangle course or the Secrets of the Bitcoin Triangle course. And if you want to learn how to trade cryptocurrencies, you can check out the Master Cryptocurrency Trader course. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I'll be back with the next episode of the Cryptoverse. So until then, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.